Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Welcome to episode 3. In this episode, I sit down with Liz Dunn, the principal and owner of Dunn Hobbes, well-known developer in the city of Seattle who's really made her mark and a mark on Capitol Hill with developments including Melrose Market and Chophouse Row and Agnes Lofts and the Piston and Ring building, home to one of my favorite Italian restaurants, La Spiga, and many more. Liz has breathed new life into a number of our historic buildings within the city of Seattle and has made a big impact on how we experience those buildings today and the food and beverage tenants and retail that she has brought in. And she's always been someone that has worked really closely and collaboratively with her tenants over the years and bringing in first-time business owners and entrepreneurs and micro businesses and bringing us original and unique ideas and concepts and individuals and creating a platform for them to thrive. And today, a majority of Liz's tenants are either women-owned or minority-owned or both. So she's been really thoughtful in how she's both developed, the physical projects and properties, but also in how she's engaged the people that end up occupying them and creating economic opportunity for others. Liz came to the city of Seattle from her home country of Canada and first was a software developer for Microsoft before changing gears and getting into development and developing the 1310 East Union project, one of my favorite residential buildings in the city of Seattle, just a gorgeous property and project. And Liz is involved in a number of other community and civic ventures. She's one of my bosses on the board of the Downtown Seattle Association and also involved in the community effort and grassroots effort to lid and cap Interstate 5 between downtown and Capitol Hill. And we talk about that, and we talk about what it's been like to be a landlord through this pandemic and to be a developer and to have that exposure and tenants and to have those loans and to work through this challenging period of the last 2 or so years and what it's meant to be a leader of her own company and organization, but also have a lot of tenants in her buildings looking to her for support and guidance through this most challenging period. So I hope you enjoy my discussion with developer and all-around just great person and Seattleite, Liz Dunn. Thank you, Liz, for spending time on our new podcast, Seattle City Makers. This is episode 3, and we're coming to you from the Overcast room at the Cloud Room. Did I get that right? In Chophouse Row.
It's the Overcast. Yes, it's the Overcast room at Cloud Studios. Actually, that's what we call it.
At Cloud Studios.
At Chophouse Row.
So we're taking our little infant podcast to the next level with this dedicated studio with great acoustics. So we're going to sound terrific. But I appreciate you spending time on our podcast. There's a lot of ground that we want to cover, and I don't want to look too far back and spend too much time dwelling on what have been a difficult almost 2 years for everybody. But I want to get a little bit of your perspective on sort of how you've managed through as a leader. I was reading a Seattle Business Magazine article profile on you and talked about your sort of key leadership traits. Of course, this was pre-pandemic. You talked about the importance of being curious and always asking questions, self-deprecating in many ways. What was the trait over these last couple of years as a leader? We're jumping in right to the hard stuff. There's no soft entry in that. Okay. So sorry about that. What was the trait you had to lean into or develop in your leadership of your team and all that you do?
Well, that's a great question. And I would definitely say that some new leadership skills had to be developed because it was uncharted territory. I think things shifted pretty quickly where the pandemic hit and none of us really understood what was going on, but I definitely understood that everyone around me was looking to me to some extent for cues on what to do, which is a lot of responsibility. But, I've got my own team and then all these tenants, these small business tenants and members at the Cloud Room, they were all looking to me to sort of know what they were supposed to do, how they were supposed to behave, what was going to happen next. And I'll tell you, I didn't know any better than anybody else, but I think the leadership skill you develop in that context is you appear very calm and self-confident. You exude, it will all be okay. You pretend to be very decisive.
Then you go cry in your pillow at night.
And then you go cry in your pillow at night. And, I'm joking, but I'm not. I really felt like the most important thing was that people felt reassured that there was somebody who was going to sort of help figure out the lay of the land. That was probably particularly true for all these tenants. I probably have across various properties about 30 small businesses. And I mean small, family-owned. Half of them are either women-owned or BIPOC-owned. And these are businesses we need in our city and we need to support. And I spent the first part of the pandemic really trying to figure that out because there was no roadmap. But I will say, here's the other thing you realize in a situation like this. Your community actually really matters and is really there for you. And I'm not just saying this because, John, I'm talking to you or because I'm on the DSA board. All the community efforts that I've participated in over the years and the relationships that I've built, I use those relationships. Like I was calling people up to ask advice. And, I would say you sort of referenced that article from before COVID. I do think that humility is a really valuable trait because it makes you unafraid to go pick the brain of someone who is smarter or has more experience. It's something I never am embarrassed to ask for advice or someone else's point of view. And so, while I was exuding leadership, to calm my tenants and the people who depend on me, I was also, in the background going for advice and perspective to all these other people in the community that I'd built relationships with over the years. And it made me, I'm actually going to get a little emotional because Seattle is still a small town in the best possible way, in that particular way. So it made me realize that was still true. It made me realize that I think it's one of the things that makes us unique. Like, sure, we're a big city and we're, all glamorous and techie and have been the envy of a lot of other cities. And it feels like things up until COVID were moving really fast. So it was reassuring to find out that it still was this very close-knit community in all the ways that mattered.
Thanks for saying
COVID.
All that and reminding us too, like in many ways, Seattle came together throughout this pandemic, particularly early on. And it seems like a lifetime ago, some of those efforts through the Seattle Foundation and the stuff that was done, through the philanthropic community to, help those most on the edge.
Oh, yeah, feeding restaurant workers and
the efforts you were involved in around helping live music venues. There's so much of this divisiveness that kind of hangs over our nation. We sort of forget that in a lot of ways, Seattle really showed up and stepped up as far as collaboration and coming together and to help a bunch of people and places. And
I think that's true. And I think, part of it is just that we're very lucky. Like Seattle seems to attract a certain breed of collaborator, if you like, or it's just a nice place. I think that helps. We have a culture that manages to pull the newcomers in and maybe imbue them with that sense of community. And I think the other thing is there's this sort of understanding amongst people who are involved in the civic leadership that just on an economic front, neighborhoods are ecosystems. And so the reason that we needed to keep our arts organizations alive, the reason we need to keep our live music venues alive, the reason we need our small BIPOC-owned retailers on their feet is because we have something really special in this city, but we can't let it collapse. Like these are all linchpins, and we needed them to still be standing when we came out the other side of this, because otherwise they were going to be permanently lost. And I feel optimistic. We're not out of this yet, which I will say is I'm still struggling, as a business owner and an office landlord in particular. And I know a lot of our downtown colleagues are feeling that same pain. But I do feel like a lot of leaders in my position in the community or landlords made the smart move, which was keep the tenants in their spaces, keep these businesses alive until we come out the other side, and then we'll figure it out. I will say one other thing just along this theme of appreciating my community. So, it's a little bit nutsy boltsy, but it has to do with being a landlord because you have loans. And a lot of attention got paid to how to keep the tenants alive. There were a lot of great government programs. Not so much for mom and pop landlords.
There's no landlord protection.
There was no
act
landlord
or
protection
or
act. Everyone assumes that we're,
you're printing money in the basement, right?
Yeah. And meanwhile, I'm just hanging on for dear life because my tenants can't pay rent, but I have several large bank loans on various properties. But in the last downturn 10 years ago, I got treated really badly by a couple of large national banks. And at that point, I decided to switch all of my loans to locally owned banks that were headquartered in Washington State. And that proved to be the lifeline this time around because I literally knew the CEO of every bank that I have a loan with, and they personally knew the asset that they had lent on. And they also didn't want to be the reason why these small businesses would go under or that I would go under. And therefore, that would have a huge impact on these businesses, and they didn't want to foreclose on those loans. And so the fact that those were actual personal local relationships was huge. So, as you said, we don't have to dwell on it that much, but boy, oh boy, did I feel unexpectedly supported by my community in so many different ways.
And you mentioned that, office is part of your portfolio, the cloud room, a co-working space, cultural venue, event space, bar.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see, the office and return to work and working in an office going? Are you thinking differently about the cloud room and co-working and just your office portfolio in general?
Well, I'm glad we have the cloud room because it kind of plays this essential role in bringing the whole community together at Chophouse Row. And it is an attractive amenity when you're leasing office space elsewhere in the building. It feels like this warm, friendly little clubhouse. And what we do at Chophouse is if you are an office tenant, you automatically get privileges at the cloud room. So you can host meetings, you can bring colleagues up for drinks at the bar. You get member rates to host events, and it feels really nice, I think, for prospective office tenants. And we did one of the few office leases in Seattle that wasn't like a huge tech campus type lease, but sort of a regular office lease in May. You can count on one hand the number of new leases that got signed in Seattle. So we felt really good about that. And we know explicitly from the tenant and their broker, it was because they just wanted to plug into Chophouse Row. Like they love the idea of the community here and it feels very safe to them. We work really hard on our safety rules to make sure that the people that show up feel both welcomed but also protected. And so I think, the cloud room, the co-working industry wasn't very organized or unified in their approach to how to deal with COVID. And so we were making that up as we went too. But very early on, we had plexiglass partitions between every desk and we had procedures and we have a hard vaccination requirement that we implemented right at the beginning of when people could get vaccines. So we don't make any exceptions to that. And our membership is growing quite rapidly again. And I think it's as a result of the fact that we've set some tough rules, but space feels really safe. And
people want to get the hell out of their kitchens too.
And people want to get the hell out of their kitchens. We did this play on, that bring your kid to work day. So we have a program at the Cloud Room, which is bring your kid to work every day if you have to. So literally, they can't be, a screaming 6-year-old who can't, bring your well-behaved kid to work. And so we ran a number of...
Have the dogs always been welcome?
The dogs have always been welcome.
Yeah, figured.
Yeah. So, we've done a number of kind of creative promotions like that. So co-working is going well. I think co-working across the city and probably across the country is going much better than office leasing is going, just by the nature of the people who, as you said, they're trying to get out of their kitchen or their bedroom and get some sanity and feel like they're in a space with other people who are being productive. There is a difference between trying to get stuff done at home and sitting in a space where other people are clearly also getting work done. It really does. I get more done at work. I'm sorry. I'm very biased toward we all need to get back to an office environment at least part of the time. We need the interaction. We need that kind of professionalism floating around in the air that makes us productive. And I think we all aspire to be a little bit social. So even if we're not, and it's funny, people ask me about this all the time because we will talk about co-working as a place to socialize and collaborate. And in fact, not that many people who don't know each other are chit-chatting away all day long, but nor should they be. But the nice thing is they could if they wanted to.
Yeah, I always use this line to, of why I love cities and downtowns is the ability to be alone around other people.
That is
and in a moment's notice,
right.
you could decide to be social and talk to the guy next to you at the bar.
Yeah.
Or you can ignore him and be on your laptop and, talk to the bartender or nobody. And that flexibility and freedom is...
That defines co-working to a T.
Yeah.
People love sitting in the room 10 feet away from someone else who is being creative and productive, even if they're not talking to each other. So the co-working story is pretty upbeat. It's always been a tough business financially, but I would say that that has nothing to do with COVID. Co-working just is labor intensive, and so the math isn't as rosy as you might think. When people call me up and say, hey, I'm thinking about opening a co-working business, I always say, okay, take your projected costs and double them.
Mm-hmm.
But the office, across the different buildings that I own, we're probably a third office, a third retail and restaurant, and a third residential. Residential has saved us. Retail and restaurant are shaky, but full because we didn't want to lose anybody. So, shaky from a financial perspective. And I think the restaurants are feeling themselves shaky again. This is not good for their comeback. The future of office is the big question looming over all of us these days.
Yeah.
And I know that's
I'm
true for
bullish
downtown.
And also biased, like you on office. I've been going back over a year now, and we're fully back in our offices downtown. And there's a rhythm and structure that I think is important to our lives, and some separation from where we live and what we do there from where we work. That's important. So
Absolutely.
I'm with you.
Well, I have a friend who runs one of the biggest office portfolios in the country, and I'm going to quote her because but she said what's going to bring, she's also very bullish, by the way. She said what's going to bring everybody back eventually is FOMO. Mm-hmm. She said it's like a squirrel cage. And so it might be slow, and it might be particularly slow on the West Coast where employers have given their employees a ton of autonomy and slack. But eventually, FOMO is what will get people back in. It will grow on its own, and people sitting at home will start to feel like they're missing out. And they will be missing out. It may just take a while yet.
Yeah, I think the preferences, at least from those, by those who wanted to be in cities in the first place prior to the pandemic, fundamentally haven't really changed. So as the cities come back, I think people want to work in those places for all the reasons they did before the pandemic. So.
Yeah, I think you're right, especially young people. I mean, who wants to be 25 and have just graduated from college and moved halfway across the country from where you grew up and sit in an apartment and work all day in a city where you don't know anybody and now have really very limited means of meeting anybody?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, we've sort of judged, or this work from home phenomenon has been judged through the eyes of somebody, later in their career that has already built a network and is maybe on their last job, not their first. And
Exactly.
It's a different scenario for those who aren't. So you've got a new project on the books, or maybe it's I think further along than that. But tell us what it is, the brewery up in the Central District, and what's happening there.
Rodney Hines, who's the owner of Metier Brewery, has been a friend of mine probably for 15 years. We were on the board of Community Roots Housing together. We became really good friends, and we always wanted to do something together. And Metier is the only African-American owned brewery in Washington State. Rodney's always been a real leader, and he was an executive at Microsoft. He was an executive at Starbucks. He understands business and food and beverage particularly well. He's from Philadelphia. I hope I got that right. And it's not Pittsburgh, or he'll kill me.
Can't make that mistake.
You can't make that mistake. But he's lived in Seattle for a long time. He lives in the Central District. So we always knew we wanted to do something together in his neighborhood. And initially, it wasn't so much about Metier as just he and I wanting to do some economic development stuff together. I approach the Central District with a lot of humility because it's a very different community from Capitol Hill. And where I've done my projects in Capitol Hill, this part of Capitol Hill didn't really have any issues with who you were displacing because it was auto dealerships in the buildings where I've done my projects. Those were auto dealerships who moved away for external reasons. They wanted to be further south. They wanted to be closer to the freeways where they could be accessed by customers from both sides of the lake. It really, them leaving Capitol Hill they didn't get forced out. You know what I mean? And so Capitol Hill and the developments I've done here were a moment in time about 20 years ago when those dealership buildings started turning over, and there was a lot of cool opportunity to do design-oriented projects and also think about what great local businesses you could put into them and revive a neighborhood that had really become pretty sleepy and not particularly pedestrian friendly. And then what happened as me and some other property owners started putting cool little coffee shops and restaurants into these buildings, then the multifamily developers started to become enthusiastic because there's stuff for apartment renters to walk to. And so that's an easier challenge in many ways because you're sort of making something out of a neighborhood that's previous cycle was just naturally coming to an end. The Central District, I approach with a bunch of humility and only in partnership with community members there, people of color. It's traditionally the African-American neighborhood in our city. And I think I can bring some skills and experience to the table that are helpful, but I'm not trying to drive a vision the way I did on Capitol Hill. I'm trying to be helpful by being a part of the platform by which development happens in a way that makes sense for the community and local African-American or BIPOC-owned businesses go into those projects when they're finished. So the brew pub, Rodney and I went together to look at that property a few years ago. It's on a pretty underdeveloped section of Cherry, but where there's still a preponderance of African-American owned properties and businesses. But we liked it because it's a pretty, what's the word I want to use, granular property layout. I mean, there's no big parcels that my dear friends at Vulcan or Lake Union Partners, I mean, I love those guys. Great people. Don't get me wrong, but like I can't compete against them. Like I do my own little thing and it's much more small scale and granular. And so we were kind of interested in finding a location where, you know, we weren't going to have like some huge thing come in next to us that we didn't, you know, again, I like those small scale streets. It's, and this was the most hilarious little building. So it had been built as an auto repair garage in the 1990s after it had sat vacant for a long time. I mean, we obviously researched the property records back to the beginning. It had had a house in the 1800s up until about 1950. House was demolished and it sat vacant for a long time. And then a little 900 square foot concrete box, an auto repair shop was built. It was later sold to a blacksmith, and he had decided to move up north, and he sold it to us. And this was just before COVID, and it had this front yard. So imagine this tiny little 900 square foot building, but with this big forecourt where customers used to park their cars. And so we took that entire forecourt, literally more than doubled the size of the building, with this indoor-outdoor room that we designed before COVID.
Ahead of the curve.
Yeah, lucky. That opens up in the summer, closes up in the winter with these big glass panels, has heaters, but it feels outdoorsy. And then there's a little parking pad where we can put either a food truck or a band if we want to do live entertainment in the summer. And so it's just this tiny little jewel. And then Rodney's wheels start to turn as we're in design. You know, the Metier is headquartered out in Woodinville now, and that's been great for them. They're in a big warehouse space that also has a customer-facing component, a little bar, food trucks, picnic tables. But Woodinville's pretty far out. Rodney's a Seattle Central District guy, and he's like, oh my God, I just have to do the brew pub here. And, you know, and I had been thinking that all along, but you don't want to push too hard. You know, we had talked to other prospective tenants, and then finally Rodney was like, oh no, it's got to be me.
Do it here.
I got to do it here.
And so, it's close to opening. Do I have that right? I said on the books, but it's almost done.
Yeah, I would say a couple months.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's public now because Rodney also made another exciting announcement, which is that they are partnering with the Mariners on the brew pub across the street from the baseball stadium. And so, he's on fire right now. Yeah, so he's going to be doing that
on either side of the city.
Yeah, and this little flagship in the Central District. And so it'll be open by spring For sure. So that's fun. And, and there may be some other stuff for us nearby. We're just trying to figure that out. But again, it's got to be in partnership and in sync with what's going on in the neighborhood. And again, my role there needs to be a supporting one more than anything.
Mm-hmm. So you also have your fair share of extracurricular activities.
I have a few.
the idea of lidding I-5 has been one that you've been involved in for a number of years, of capping and creating some land and open space that had a good amount of momentum before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Where does it sit today as far as that vision, idea, the energy behind it, and the group you've been working with to try to move it forward?
Yeah. I mean, I first and foremost always need to acknowledge that, gosh, we're probably the fourth or fifth or sixth group over the years that has tried to tackle this, like almost since before the freeway was built. There was a lot of opposition to that freeway going through, and the Federal Highway Administration pushed it through against a majority of the population in Seattle objecting. And for good reason. I think I've told you this story that when I arrived in Seattle as a college intern 35 years ago, driving my rental car downtown for the first time on like a Sunday afternoon, and I saw the freeway cut through, and then I saw the viaduct on the waterfront, and I was so sad and disappointed because Seattle is so beautiful if you think about the first time you lay eyes on it. It's such a beautiful city. And then it was such a tragedy to me that these two highways were such scars on the city. And so, that first impression, it fades after a little while. You kind of get used to it, but I don't think we should get used to it. I think it is really ugly. Oh, thank goodness we've done something about the viaduct. And we are going to get tremendous leverage as a city out of the new waterfront. I don't think people even understand yet how great it's going to be. Like, I think we all think it's going to be great, and it's going to be even better than we think. And so, step one, that's fantastic. But step two is that we have this freeway cutting off our downtown from our most populous neighborhood. The people who live in apartments in the really dense part of North Capitol Hill have no way to get down to their tech jobs at South Lake Union without crossing these hideous overpasses where the sidewalks are 4 feet wide. And, and those are all the sort of the aesthetic experiential reasons. I think that what we've all come to understand, and this was emphasized by the feasibility study that was finished just before COVID, is that there are now all these positive drivers for why we might want to consider lidding as much of the downtown I-5 trench as we can. We are a city that needs more land. We are a city that definitely needs more affordable housing in the center of the city. We've had some housing built, but it hasn't been a great range of income levels. The cost of lidding a freeway at this point is not that out of line with what developers are willing to pay for land to build on. And so there is a gap, but it's not a huge gap. And so if you then look at the public benefit of creating some strategically placed open space in a city, I think we have the lowest ratio of usable open space of any major city in the country. So we have that huge problem. We don't have enough open space. We're running out of buildable land for affordable housing. And we have this opportunity to connect our neighborhoods from a mobility perspective, from a pedestrian perspective. So I think now, versus, again, all these groups that have worked on this issue over the years, all motivated by how horrible this thing is. Now there's some real positive motivators that I think will help drive it forward. The pandemic definitely caused us to sort of step back and leave it alone at a moment when it wasn't the thing that we all needed to be focused on. I think that now that we are hopefully in the last stretch of this pandemic and all looking forward to, building a better future, we are now starting to have those conversations with the city and with the state about how to take the feasibility study and then push forward with more specific studies of traffic flows downtown, and can you get rid of on and off ramps in downtown where they impede the ability to to live. And it turns out there may be other really good reasons why those ramps have outlived their usefulness in an era of trying to just improve transit mobility through downtown and reconnect the downtown grid. So I think the timing is good. I think our little group came to the issue at the right time. We are grateful to the convention center for funding the feasibility study out of their mitigation funds. And it's going to set us up really well, I think, to have the conversations we need to have going forward. And then, of course, there's a vast amount of federal interest in this specific issue that didn't exist in the last administration.
That's right. And there's other cities that have done this.
There's other cities that are pushing hard to do it too. So it's no longer crazy kind of to talk about wanting to get some of that federal money here to help us reconnect our downtown when other cities are pushing really hard at this exact same moment.
Well, and no crazier than, 20 plus years ago, the idea of taking the viaduct down, building the biggest bored tunnel in the world under downtown, and then, creating a great new waterfront, which we're close to realizing. So we got to start somewhere.
You got to start somewhere, and these things take a long time, but,
It's hard to find a city that's made more changes to its landscape than, Seattle when you think back over our history, right? Of the Denny Hills and the Montlake Cut. And so maybe this is, the next move here.
It's funny you say that. I've used that in a presentation before. Like Seattle is literally the city that likes to remake itself.
Yeah, we're just constantly dissatisfied with our landscape.
We're
to
always
some degree.
raising streets, lowering streets, cutting canals. Yeah.
So we'll conclude with another effort you've been involved with, or at least I think know something about, and that's this recent announcement for sort of the rebirth, reimagination of what we've known as Bumbershoot that, occurs over Labor Day weekend or has at the Seattle Center, but an exciting new announcement with a lot of, great local thinkers and creative minds to remake it into something different. What are we expecting to see? And who's involved and what's your involvement been?
I'm involved peripherally. I'm a huge supporter of this team. And so I've been helping them behind the scenes since the summer when they decided that they wanted to pursue the opportunity. It was very competitive because there were some very large national concert promoters who wanted to buy the franchise. And frankly, would have just produced some of the sort of same old festivals that we see all around the country at astronomical ticket prices with no local content. Greg, Steve, and Joe, the three leaders of the team, all come with different but highly complementary skills, from visual arts to music programming. Steve Severin owns several clubs in town and has access to the best musical talent both locally and around the country. And Joe currently runs McCaw Hall and has a history as a live event producer. And they want to do something that leverages the Bumbershoot brand to create an all year round experience for Seattleites that is not just at Seattle Center, but also downtown, that kind of stakes out the edgier side of our local arts scene to complement, the more traditional arts organizations that are already downtown. I think it's going to be fantastic for downtown, I have to say. If I think back to when I was a young tech kid who got recruited to come out here and the generations since then, they look at Seattle as having this kind of secret sauce culturally. In my era, it was grunge. And since then, there's been a lot of other musical talent that has emerged in different genres. But we have this track record and this reputation that we need to perpetuate. And these are the guys to do it. Like everybody I lobbied this fall about this opportunity, I said, we are so grateful they even want to. It's going to be a ton of work, but they are the dream team. Like this is a gift. So we need to accept it, and run with it. So I'm super excited because, again, we all, and I know, John, you and I feel this keenly. We need some wins for Seattle. This is a win. This is a huge win. It's going to be really good for the future of downtown.
Yeah, sure looks like it to me. I'm excited about it. And I think cities and urban places just, need to continue to reinvent. And, you got to respect your past and traditions and in the history, but you got to always be sort of re-energizing. And Seattle's done a great job at that over its history and leveraging its creative talents and being on the frontier and doing things differently. And this sounds like another great opportunity. And the idea of it going from a weekend festival to sort of this year-round type of deal is, I think, a huge home run.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Well, thank you, Liz, for coming on Seattle City Makers and hosting us in this great studio. But more importantly, for all you've done for Seattle and this neighborhood and others. And I look forward to having a beer with you at the new brewery in the Central District.
Yes, I look forward to it too. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Well, thanks to Liz, and thanks to you for tuning in and listening. If you're looking to get a little bit more information on the concept of lidding I-5, and that's something you haven't been tracking, check out lidi5.org, which is the website for the organization and community group that Liz has been involved in, that has been pushing and pursuing this big, bold idea of capping our freeway and creating some more public space and potentially housing and other community uses and investments over that freeway. So check out lidi5.org. To conclude our podcast today, episode 3, I want to end, as I do, with the can't miss, don't miss, must see, must do moment, event, place, experience in downtown. And I'll conclude with my recommendation of checking out the new lobby bar and speakeasy at the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Seattle between 4th and 5th Avenues on University there. They spent about $25 million in the lobby over the last couple of years in renovating that gorgeous historic hotel. And it's just a phenomenal bar and food experience across the lobby, building a new sort of central bar in the middle of the lobby. And then a little speakeasy, a little cocktail whiskey speakeasy behind the bookcases there as you walk up the stairs on the northwest side of the building. It's a great bar, I think, any time of the year, but certainly in these winter, early spring months. It's a lively atmosphere. I highly recommend it. Check out the new and renovated Fairmont Bar and Whiskey Speakeasy. And soon, as I understand it, the former Georgian Room will reopen for, I think, lunch and dinner. So check the website out of the Fairmont and keep an eye on that. So thank you for joining us. You can find me and connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on Instagram. I welcome your ideas and suggestions and feedback. You can reach me over email at jons@downtownseattle.org. As always, this show is presented by the Downtown Seattle Association with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.